The war had lasted so long that no one remembered how it had begun. Generations had been born and raised under the shadow of conflict. The humans called their enemies the Tharks, a race of tall, scaled beings with golden eyes and armor that gleamed like metal. To the Tharks, humans were fragile creatures, quick to anger but even quicker to adapt. Both sides believed victory was close, yet both were exhausted beyond measure. On a ruined planet near the edge of the contested zone, a young human soldier named Daniel Hale marched with his unit. The city around him was a graveyard of broken towers and shattered streets. Fires burned where shells had landed only hours before. The air carried dust and smoke, stinging the eyes and clogging the throat. Daniel was 27, broad-shouldered, with brown hair kept short beneath his helmet. He carried his rifle in weary hands, but his heart was heavier than the weapon. The mission was simple: secure the central district and hold it until reinforcements arrived. Yet Daniel knew nothing about war was ever simple. The enemy had already counterattacked 3 times that day. His squad had lost 2 men. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces. War demanded soldiers to obey, but inside Daniel, something had begun to resist. As his squad moved through the crumbled streets, they heard a strange sound. It was faint at first, like a high-pitched cry carried by the wind. Daniel froze and raised his hand, signaling the others to halt. The cries grew clearer, echoing between the ruins. They were not the sharp calls of Thark's warriors. They were softer, desperate, and frightened. "Child," Daniel whispered to himself. The others muttered nervously. "Leave it," his sergeant ordered. "We're not here to save strays. Could be a trap." Daniel's boots felt rooted to the ground. He knew it could be a trick. The Tharks sometimes lured humans into ambushes, but something in that cry pierced him deeper than fear. Against his orders, he stepped forward. The sergeant hissed in anger, but Daniel pressed on, following the sound into a half-collapsed building. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Light poured through cracks in the ceiling, revealing rubble piled like a broken mountain. In the corner, beneath a slab of stone, a small figure trembled. Its skin shimmered pale green, scales not yet hardened. The child's golden eyes were wide with terror. Tiny claws scratched at the rock that pinned its leg. A Thark's child. Daniel's breath caught. He had never seen one up close. Not alive. Most humans believed Thark's children were just smaller versions of the warriors they fought, born cruel and unfeeling. Yet the little one before him looked no different from any scared child. Its chest rose and fell quickly, and tears, clear as water, ran down its cheeks. The child whimpered as Daniel approached. It tried to pull back, but the stone held it fast. Daniel knelt, setting down his rifle. He removed his helmet, showing his face. "Easy," he whispered, though he knew the child could not understand his words. "I won't hurt you." He pressed his shoulder against the slab and pushed. Pain shot through his arms, but the stone shifted slightly. The child cried out, not in fear but in hope. Daniel gritted his teeth, adjusted his stance, and pushed again. With a final heave, the stone rolled aside, freeing the small leg. The child scrambled away a few steps, then stopped. It stared at him, trembling, uncertain whether to flee or stay. Daniel noticed the leg was scraped and bleeding, but not broken. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small water flask. Gently, he placed it on the floor between them and slid it closer. The child blinked, sniffed, then grabbed the flask with tiny claws. It drank greedily, water dripping down its chin. For the first time, Daniel smiled during this war. "That's it, you're safe now." But safety never lasted long in war. Shouts erupted outside, followed by the crack of gunfire. Daniel's squad had engaged enemy soldiers. The sound of heavy boots echoed down the street. The Thark's warriors were advancing toward the building. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run. Yet when he looked at the child clutching the flask, he knew he could not abandon it. A shadow fell across the doorway. A Thark soldier stepped inside, tall and armored, weapon raised. His golden eyes locked on the human kneeling near the child. In that instant, Everything froze. The child let out a cry, rushing toward Daniel. Without thinking, Daniel threw his body over the small figure just as the weapon fired. The blast struck Daniel's armor, searing pain into his side. He gasped, but held firm, wrapping his arms around the child to shield it. He expected death to follow instantly, but it did not. The Thark soldier had lowered his weapon, staring in shock. Never had he seen a human protect one of their children. Outside, more soldiers gathered, both human and Tharks. The gunfire faltered as more eyes turned toward the building. Through the broken wall, they saw the impossible. A human cradling an alien child, shielding it with his own wounded body. Whispers ran through the ranks. Even the harsh voices of commanders could not cut through the silence of disbelief. For a brief moment, the battlefield held its breath. The child clung tightly to Daniel's chest, pressing its small head against him. Daniel grimaced in pain, but held on. His blood dripped onto the floor, mixing with the dust. He looked up at the Thark's soldier who had fired. The alien's hands shook slightly, his weapon lowering further. He could not bring himself to finish the shot. Then from the distance, a powerful voice rang out in the alien tongue. A command. The Thark soldiers stepped back, parting as another figure approached. She was taller than the others, her armor black with silver markings, her presence commanding respect. Her golden eyes burned with authority. This was no ordinary warrior. This was a commander. Daniel's vision blurred as he struggled to stay awake. Yet he saw the moment the child spotted her. With a cry of relief, the small figure wriggled free from Daniel's arms and ran forward. The commander bent down, lifting the child gently. Her stern face softened for a heartbeat as she checked the little one's injuries. Then her gaze rose, falling upon Daniel. Their eyes met, human and alien, soldier and enemy. She had watched him shield her child, taking fire that was meant to kill. She could not understand why. Her people had told her humans were selfish, cruel, and merciless. Yet this one had risked everything for someone not his own. Daniel coughed, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. He expected her to finish him with a single command, but she did not. Instead, she stood silently, her expression unreadable. Around them, both armies waited for her decision. The war seemed to pause in her hands. The child reached out, pointing back at Daniel, chattering quickly in the alien tongue. Its tone was urgent, almost pleading. The commander listened, her golden eyes narrowing in thought. Then she looked again, at the human soldier who had risked his life for her child. Daniel's strength faded, darkness closing in around him. The last thing he saw before collapsing was the alien commander holding her child close, her gaze still locked on him with something more than anger, something he could not yet name. And so, on a battlefield scarred by hatred, a single act of compassion broke the pattern of endless bloodshed. A human soldier had shielded the enemy's child with his own body. What this meant for the war, for the two races, and for Daniel himself, none could yet say. But the seeds of change had been planted. When Daniel opened his eyes again, he was no longer on the battlefield. The ceiling above him curved in smooth, pale metal, glowing faintly with soft light. The air was cool and strangely clean, free from smoke and dust. For a moment, he thought, he had died and awakened somewhere beyond the war. But then he felt the sharp pain in his side, and reality returned. He lay on a bed unlike any human stretcher, with sheets that shimmered like liquid silver. A bandage of glowing threads was wrapped across his ribs, pulsing gently. He touched it and winced, but the pain was dulled. Someone had treated his wounds with alien technology. The sound of voices drifted into the room. Harsh, guttural tones filled the air, yet they carried discipline. Thark soldiers. Daniel stiffened, his training urging him to prepare for capture or interrogation. He tried to rise, but weakness forced him back down. His weapon and armor were gone. He was there, prisoner. The door slid open with a hiss. A figure entered, tall and graceful, clad in dark armor that gleamed under the soft light. Her golden eyes locked onto him immediately. Daniel recognized her at once, the commander who had taken the child in her arms. She stood silent, her presence heavy, like a storm waiting to break. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the walls. Daniel forced himself to sit up, ignoring the pain. He met her gaze, determined not to show fear. If this was the end, he would face it with dignity. The commander's eyes flicked to his wound, then back to his face. She spoke in her own tongue, a question sharp and commanding. Daniel shook his head slowly. "I don't understand," he said. His voice was rough, his throat dry. She frowned, then gestured. Another figure entered, a smaller Tharks dressed in robes instead of armor. He carried a device shaped like a curved stone. With a touch, it hummed and projected a faint light. The robed alien spoke, and the device repeated his words in halting but clear English. "This one, interpreter. Speak. Understand." Daniel stared in awe. A translation tool. He nodded gratefully. "Thank you." The commander stepped closer. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath. The device translated, "Why? Why you shield my child with your body? You are enemy. You are human. Why?" Daniel swallowed. The memory of the battlefield flashed again, the cries, the fear, the small body clinging to him. He found his voice. Because it was a child. It didn't matter if it was human or Tharks. Children should never suffer for wars they did not choose. The translation echoed his words into the alien tongue. The commander's eyes narrowed slightly, but she did not look away. She studied him as though searching for hidden motives. Around them, silence stretched long. Finally, she spoke again. "You expect me to believe this? That human soldier risked life? For nothing?" Daniel shook his head. "Not for nothing. For what's right." Her gaze hardened, but a flicker of something, uncertainty perhaps, passed across her face. She turned and spoke briefly to the robed interpreter, who bowed and left. When the door closed, only she and Daniel remained. She paced slowly, her armor whispering with each step. "You saved life of my child. This I cannot ignore. Among my people, debt must be repaid. But also, question remains. What kind of enemy risks life for others' blood?" Daniel managed a faint smile. "Maybe the kind who's tired of fighting." The commander stopped, her eyes sharpening. For a heartbeat, the mask of authority slipped, and he saw the mother beneath. She was not only a leader of soldiers, but also a parent whose child had nearly been lost. And he had been the one to prevent that loss. The silence broke when the door hissed open again. The small Thark's child entered, limping slightly but walking on its own. When it saw Daniel, its golden eyes brightened, and it ran forward. Before the commander could stop it, the child scrambled onto the bed and pressed itself against Daniel's arm, chirping happily in its own tongue. Daniel froze, then carefully rested his hand on the child's back. The scales were smooth and cool under his touch. The little one purred softly, a sound of comfort. The commander watched, her face unreadable, but her hand tightened briefly on her weapon, not in threat, but in tension she could not hide. The translation device was not here, yet no words were needed. The child's joy spoke louder than any language. It clung to the human soldier as if he were already family. And for the first time, the commander seemed unsure of what to do. At last, she stepped forward and gently pulled the child back. It whined in protest but obeyed. She lifted it into her arms, holding it close. Then she looked at Daniel again. "My child trusts you," she said slowly, as if testing the words in English. Her accent was heavy, but the meaning was clear. "That is strange." Daniel nodded. "Children see truth better than adults." Her eyes studied him again, searching. At last, she gave a short nod. "I am Commander Serath," she said, speaking her name with pride. "You will not be harmed while under my watch. You saved my bloodline. I owe you a life." With that, she turned and left, carrying the child. Daniel leaned back against the strange silver pillow, his body weak but his mind racing. He had just spoken with one of the most feared commanders of the enemy army, and instead of killing him, she had spared him. Because of the child. Because of one choice he had made. The following days blurred into strange rhythm. Daniel remained in the alien facility, recovering. Soldiers came and went, always watching him but never attacking. The interpreter returned often, asking questions about his people, his unit, his reason for fighting. Daniel gave little away about strategy, but when asked about himself, he spoke honestly. He told them of Earth's blue skies, of music, of laughter between friends. The interpreter listened carefully, his eyes widening at the idea that humans were more than just soldiers. The child visited daily. Sometimes it brought small objects, a glowing crystal, a carved stone, a piece of fruit with sharp sweetness. Each time it climbed onto Daniel's bed and chattered happily. He could not understand the words, but he understood the warmth. Slowly, he began to mimic sounds, learning the child's language piece by piece. Laughter came more easily in those moments than it had in years. Commander Sarath watched all of this from a distance. She spoke little, but her presence was always near. Her soldiers whispered in the halls. Some said she was bewitched by the human. Others claimed she was betraying her people's honor. But Sarath ignored them. She had seen something none of them had, the moment an enemy shielded her child with his own body. That image refused to leave her mind. One evening she entered his room again, dismissing the guards. She stood before him silent for a long time. Then she spoke through the interpreter. "Your leaders, they tell your kind we are monsters. That we take and destroy. Is this true?" Daniel hesitated, then answered carefully. "That is what they say, yes. But they also say humans are monsters to you." Sarath's eyes narrowed. "Then, both are blind." Daniel nodded. "Maybe both are afraid." Her gaze softened slightly. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You changed something, human. My warriors saw you. My people whisper of you. They cannot understand. Some call you fool. Others call you proof." "Proof of what?" Daniel asked. She held his eyes steadily. "That humans may not be what we thought. That there is hope." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For the first time, Daniel felt a flicker of something beyond survival. Possibility. The war had always seemed endless, but here, in this room with an alien commander and her child, he glimpsed the smallest spark of peace. But sparks draw eyes. Outside, not all welcomed change. Some Tharks officers whispered that Sarath had grown weak, too close to the enemy. Others feared that allowing the human to live would bring dishonor. The human soldier had become more than a man. He was a symbol. Symbols could unite, but they could also divide. Sarath knew this. Yet when she looked at her child sleeping safely, she also knew she could never undo what had been done. The human had saved what she held most dear. For that reason alone, she would protect him. And deep inside, though she would not admit it aloud, a strange thought began to take root. If a human could show such compassion, what else might their kind be capable of? The war zone had fallen strangely quiet since the day Daniel shielded the child. Human and Thark soldiers still faced each other across ruined streets, but the battle did not resume with its old fury. Whispers carried faster than bullets, and soon every soldier on both sides had heard of the human who saved a Thark's child. Some called it weakness. Some called it madness. But many could not forget it. Daniel remained under Commander Sarath's watch. His wound was healing quickly thanks to alien medicine, though his strength had not yet returned. Every morning he woke to the soft glow of the alien chamber and the gentle hum of machines he did not understand. The child, whose name Daniel finally learned was Lyra, visited him almost every day. Lyra was full of questions. Though the translator device struggled with her young, hurried speech, Daniel understood enough. She asked why his skin had no scales, why his voice sounded rough, why his eyes were brown instead of gold. Daniel laughed often at her curiosity and answered as best as he could. Sometimes he drew shapes on a small slate she brought, showing Earth's round moon or the trees he remembered from his childhood. For Lyra, Daniel was no longer enemy. He was simply protector. Commander Sarath, however, remained harder to read. She spoke little during her visit, standing at the edge of the room with her arms crossed. Her gaze lingered on Daniel, not with open hostility, but with the sharp calculation of a leader. Yet in rare moments, when Lyra laughed loudly or clung to Daniel's arm, Sarath's stern expression softened just slightly. One evening, as Daniel rested, Sarath entered alone. She dismissed the guards outside and stepped closer. The translator floated between them, its light glowing faintly. "You are almost healed," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yes, your medicine, it works wonders." Sarath tilted her head. "When you are strong again, what will you do? Try to escape? Return to your people?" Daniel hesitated. His first instinct was to say yes. Every soldier's duty was to return to his own side. But after weeks in this place, he no longer felt the same certainty. He looked at Sarath carefully. "If I leave, will there be fighting again?" "Always," Sarath replied. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed weariness. "Our war does not end, not by choice of soldiers. It is leaders who choose far away from blood." Daniel thought of his own commanders, of the endless orders, of battles fought for reasons he no longer remembered. Slowly he said, "Then maybe soldiers should choose too." The translator repeated his words in the alien tongue. Sarath frowned, but not in anger. She seemed to weigh his statement as though it carried unexpected weight. Days later, Sarath summoned Daniel to a different chamber. He was stronger now, able to walk, though still sore. Guards escorted him, but their spears remained lowered rather than raised. They passed through halls filled with glowing crystals, their light reflecting on curved walls. Everything felt strange and yet strangely peaceful compared to the ruins outside. At last they entered a council chamber. A wide table of black stone stood in the center. On one side, human officers sat stiffly, their uniforms torn from the battlefield. On the other, Thark's commanders in gleaming armor stood tall and imposing. Between them, silence pressed heavy. Sarath entered with Daniel at her side. The humans immediately stiffened, whispering his name. He had been missing for weeks, presumed dead or captured. Now he stood alive, walking beside the enemy commander. One of his officers, Colonel Reeves, rose sharply. "Hale, are you all right? What have they done to you?" Daniel hesitated. He could feel both sides watching him, measuring him, judging him. Finally he said, "They saved me. They healed me." Reeves's face hardened. "Healed you? Or filled your head with lies?" Sarath raised a hand and the translator projected her voice. "Your soldier speaks truth. He saved my child. I gave him life in return. Now I give you chance." "Peace." Murmurs filled the room. The human officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some scoffed openly. "Peace? After years of slaughter? You expect us to trust you?" One spat. But Sarath did not falter. "I do not expect trust. I expect choice. War or peace. Continue endless blood. Or try something else." The Thark's commanders behind her shifted uneasily. Some clearly disagreed, their golden eyes narrowing. Yet none spoke against her outright. Her authority was too strong. Daniel, standing in the middle, felt the weight of both armies pressing on him. For the first time, he understood he was more than a soldier now. He was a bridge. He took a deep breath. "I don't know much about politics," he said, looking at both sides. "But I know this. When I heard that child crying, I didn't see an enemy. I saw someone who needed help. If we can't see each other as living beings first, then this war will never end." The chamber fell silent. Even Reeves did not immediately reply. Daniel's words hung in the air like a fragile thread. At last, Sarath spoke again. You see? Even your soldier understands what leaders do not. Reeves slammed his fist on the table. Enough of this. He is just one man. But one of the other human officers leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. And yet, one man has stopped fighting for weeks. Your soldiers have not attacked, Commander. Ours have not either. Perhaps there is something here. The fragile thread tightened, but did not break. In the days that followed, both armies pulled back slightly from the front lines. Not a full retreat, but enough to breathe. For the first time in years, the sound of gunfire ceased for more than a day. Soldiers on both sides found themselves staring across no man's land with uneasy curiosity instead of rage. Daniel was allowed to walk under guard. He saw humans and Tharks alike watching him, whispering his name. Some glared with hatred, others with wonder, a few even with hope. He had become a symbol, whether he wished it or not. Lyra continued to visit him, sometimes in the human camp, sometimes in the alien one. The sight of a small Thark's child skipping fearlessly among human soldiers stirred strange feelings. Some muttered angrily, but others softened when Lyra smiled at them. Children had a power adults often forgot. Daniel's presence also forced Sarath and Reeves to speak more often. Their meetings were tense, filled with suspicion but also unavoidable. Neither side wanted to appear weak in front of the man who had done what neither army had managed: stop the killing, if only for a time. But peace was a fragile thing. Whispers grew louder in both camps. Some humans accused Daniel of betrayal, saying he had gone soft, living under alien care. Among the Tharks, warriors muttered that Sarath was bewitched by the human. Both sides feared that compassion would make them weak. One night, as Daniel sat near a small fire at the edge of the human camp, Reeves approached him. The older man's face was stern. "Hail," he said quietly. "You've put us in a difficult position. Half the men see you as a hero. The other half, they think you've been turned." Daniel looked into the flames. "I didn't ask for this." Reeves sighed. "No, but you can't undo it either. That child, the commander, they've made you into something bigger than yourself. And I need to know, Hale. Whose side are you on?" Daniel lifted his eyes slowly. "I'm on the side that wants the killing to stop." Reeves stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "That answer will win you respect from some, but it will also make you enemies on both sides." Meanwhile, Sarath faced her own storm. In her private chamber, her advisors pressed her. "This human weakens you," one growled. "Already your warriors whisper. If you cannot end him, then at least claim him. Make him yours. Then his actions belong to you, not to them." Sarath listened silently. She remembered Daniel's words in the council chamber, his refusal to see only enemies. She remembered the way Lyra clung to him, trusting without fear. She knew her advisors spoke with the voice of tradition, but tradition was what had chained them in endless war. When they left, she stood alone, looking out over the camp where fires burned under alien skies. For the first time in her long service, she wondered if the path of strength was not in more battle, but in something else, something she had once thought impossible. Her golden eyes turned toward the distant glow of the human camp, toward the man who had shielded her child. The fragile silence between humans and Tharks stretched into weeks. No shots were fired, no bombs fell. For the first time in years, both armies could hear the wind through broken towers and the distant call of birds returning to empty skies. Soldiers did not cheer. No one trusted the quiet yet, but they felt its weight. The war had paused, if only for a moment. Daniel Hale, the human soldier who had once been just another name in the ranks, now walked carefully between two worlds. He was allowed to move freely under guard, sometimes in the human camp, sometimes in the Tharks' camp. To some, he was a traitor. To others, he was a living sign that peace was possible. But not everyone welcomed peace. One cold night, a human patrol stumbled upon wreckage in the outer district. Vehicles burned in the streets, their armor torn open not by Thark's weapons but by something else. The survivors spoke of raiders, mercenaries who thrived in the chaos of war. These warlords had no interest in peace. They grew rich on plunder and violence. Within days, reports arrived from both sides: convoys attacked, supply lines broken, villages raided. The third faction had risen, armed with stolen weapons from both humans and Tharks. And unlike tired soldiers, these raiders fought with reckless hunger. In the Tharks' council chamber, voices rose in anger. "They strike our borders like beasts," one commander growled. "They are human-born," another spat. "Proof your kind cannot be trusted." Daniel stood in the corner, listening. Commander Sarath's golden eyes flicked toward him, then back to her officers. Her voice cut through the noise. "These raiders care nothing for humans or Tharks. They will kill all who stand in their path. If we fight each other again, we give them victory." Her words silenced the room. Few wanted to agree, but none could deny the truth. The same debate raged in the human camp. Colonel Reeves slammed his fist on the table. "We can't ally with them. We've bled too long to suddenly stand beside Tharks." Another officer leaned forward. "And if we don't? These raiders will crush us while we waste bullets on old grudges." At last, all eyes turned to Daniel. His presence had become inevitable in every meeting. He spoke quietly but firmly. "I fought the Tharks. I saw their strength. If we face these raiders alone, neither side will survive. We must fight together, or not at all." The room was heavy with silence. Reeves scowled but gave no counter. So it began. For the first time, human soldiers and Tharks warriors marched side by side. Their movements were stiff, their glances sharp with mistrust, but necessity forced them forward. Between them walked Daniel and Sarath, unspoken symbols of the fragile alliance. And always near was Lyra, who refused to stay behind, though Sarath kept her close. The first clash came in the ruins of a marketplace. Raiders swarmed from the shadows, their armor mismatched, their banners painted with crude marks. They laughed as they charged, believing humans and Tharks would turn on each other in the heat of battle. But this time, they did not. Daniel fought at Sarath's side, his rifle barking as her blade sang. Human bullets and Tharks' energy blasts crossed, the air not against each other but against the raiders. The ground shook with the fury of their combined power. At one point, a raider lunged at Sarath with a stolen human blade. Daniel moved without thought, firing at the attacker before the weapon could strike. Later, when Daniel stumbled into enemy fire, Sarath's spear intercepted the blow, saving his life in return. Their trust, once impossible, now grew in the fire of battle. Soldiers on both sides saw it and hesitated less. They began to cover each other, humans shouting warnings to Tharks, Tharks pulling wounded humans to safety. What had been whispers of possibility became reality, forged in blood and dust. After hours of fighting, the raiders broke and fled into the night. Victory was theirs, but it was only the beginning. Around the campfires that evening, human and Thark soldiers sat in uneasy silence. Some exchanged food reluctantly. Others shared canteens of water. No one called it friendship, but for the first time, it was not hatred either. Daniel sat near the fire with Sarath and Lyra. The child leaned against him, exhausted but smiling, her golden eyes bright with pride. Sarath watched quietly, her stern face soft in the firelight. "You fight as one of us," she said at last. Daniel shook his head. "No, I fight as myself. But maybe myself is enough." Her gaze lingered on him, searching. Then she looked away. Perhaps, but peace never walked an easy road. Word spread quickly of the joint victory. Many soldiers on both sides respected what had happened. Yet others grew uneasy. Human whispers accused Daniel of betraying his kind. Thark's murmurs claimed Sarath was under human influence. And in the shadows, the raiders gathered again, vowing revenge. One night, as Daniel rested, Sarath entered his tent. Her golden eyes glowed faintly in the lamplight. She dismissed the guards and spoke softly, almost as if speaking to herself. "My people do not understand you. Some say you should be killed. Others say you should be claimed, bound to us so your loyalty cannot be questioned. They fear you because you are proof that war may end. And fear is dangerous. Daniel looked at her steadily. And you? Do you fear me? For the first time, Sarath's gaze wavered. I do not know, but I know this. If you fall, so does everything we try to build. The next battle came sooner than expected. Raiders struck a supply route carrying food for both armies. Humans and Tharks rushed to defend it. The night lit with fire as enemy machines roared through the ruins. Daniel found himself separated with only a handful of soldiers, human and Tharks mixed. They were surrounded, outnumbered. He felt fear grip him, but then he saw the young faces around him all looking to him for direction. Hold the line, Daniel shouted. His voice carried strength he did not know he had. For each other, not for sides, for life. The soldiers rallied. Humans fired from the rubble. Thark's spears gleamed in the moonlight. They fought back to back, protecting one another. Daniel moved among them, his rifle blazing, his voice steady. At the height of the battle, Lyra appeared, pulled into danger by her stubborn courage. She screamed as a raider charged at her. Daniel's heart froze. Without thought, he hurled himself forward, shielding her once more with his body. But before the enemy blow could land, Sarath struck it down, her blade glowing with fury. She pulled Lyra close, her face pale with fear. Her eyes turned to Daniel, who stood panting, sweat and dust, covering him. In that instant, something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. Together, they drove back the raiders until silence fell again. When dawn broke, the survivors stood among the ruins. The raiders had been crushed, their banners torn, their bodies scattered. But Daniel knew this was not the end. More would come. Always more. Yet something had changed forever. Humans and Tharks had fought together, saved one another, and lived. Soldiers who once spat at each other now nodded in silent respect. The alliance, fragile though it was, had been tested by fire and had not broken. That night, as the camp settled, Sarath came to Daniel once more. She stood close, her golden eyes shining in the torchlight. My people will demand a choice soon, she said quietly. They will say you must be claimed or destroyed. They cannot understand a human who belongs to no one yet fights for all. Daniel met her gaze, his voice steady. And what do you say? Sarath's hand tightened briefly on her spear. Her answer came like a whisper carried by the wind. I say, perhaps you are not meant to belong to one people. Perhaps you are meant to stand between. Her words left Daniel silent, his heart heavy but also strangely light. He knew then that the road ahead would not be easy. But he also knew this. He had found purpose beyond orders, beyond war, and in the shadows unseen others watched. Some with hope, some with envy, some with fear. The battlefield that had once echoed with endless gunfire now lay quiet. Smoke rose slowly from broken vehicles, and scattered fires glimmered faintly in the ruins. Soldiers of both humans and Tharks moved cautiously through the streets, tending to the wounded and repairing what they could. For the first time in years, no one fought, no one died. Daniel Hale walked slowly beside Lyra, the small Thark's child clutching his hand as they passed through the mixed encampment. The child laughed freely now, skipping over debris as if the horrors of war were distant memories. Daniel's wounds had healed fully, though the scars remained, a reminder of the cost of compassion. Beside them walked Commander Sarath. Her golden eyes surveyed the camp with calm authority. Though the battle was won, the challenge had only begun. Some of her people still whispered against the human who had changed everything. On the human side, doubts and envy lingered. Daniel had become a symbol of hope, yes, but also of something frightening. The idea that enemies could see each other as more than threats. The first council after the victory was tense. Human leaders and Thark's commanders gathered around a massive stone table in Sarath's command hall. Daniel stood nearby, watched closely by both sides. Lyra sat on a small bench, swinging her legs, oblivious to the heavy tension in the room. Serath spoke first. We have faced the raiders together. Neither side would have survived alone. The war has ended, not by force, but by choice. Her voice carried both pride and warning. Now, we face a different challenge, understanding one another. And understanding requires trust. A human officer scoffed. Trust? After years of slaughter? How are we supposed to trust a race that once tried to wipe us out? Serath's eyes narrowed. And yet, they fought beside you against a mutual threat. You can argue about the past, or you can fight for a future. Daniel watched carefully. Every eye in the room seemed to flick toward him. For the first time, he understood his presence was more than a personal choice. He had become a bridge between worlds. He cleared his throat. I don't know how to end years of anger overnight, but I do know this. If a child can trust me, someone who is supposed to be her enemy, then maybe we can learn to trust each other too. The room fell silent. Lyra's small voice chimed softly. Hail brave. It was enough to soften even the harshest faces, but Serath's people were not done with their judgments. Some whispered among themselves that Daniel had grown too close to the enemy, that he belonged to no one. Others argued he should remain, in Thark's care forever, bound by honor to protect their child. Serath listened but said nothing. She knew the decision would not be easy for Daniel, but she also knew she would not force him. Unlike many in her world, she had learned that respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. Days passed. The camp slowly became more orderly. Humans and Tharks shared supplies and shelters. Some laughed together, others cautiously shared stories. The air felt lighter than it had in decades, but Daniel's heart was heavy. He knew the final decision awaited him, to remain with his own people or to step into a new world that had begun to feel like home. One evening, as the sun set in fiery streaks over the ruined city, Serath invited Daniel and Lyra to walk with her on a hill overlooking the camps. Lyra skipped ahead, pointing at both human and Thark soldiers as they worked together. Serath's voice was quiet, but firm. Daniel, the choice you make now will define more than your life. My people will want to claim you, to honor you. Some will see this as reward, others as obligation. Humans may call you traitor if you stay. You must decide. Daniel looked out over the camps. Soldiers, once enemies, now worked side by side. He saw humans teaching Tharks to repair vehicles. He saw Tharks showing humans how to set traps for raiders. And there, in the middle of it all, Lyra laughed safe and free. He thought back to that first day on the battlefield, the cries of a frightened child, the fire that almost took his life, the moment he had chosen to protect her above himself. That choice had rippled outward, touching everyone here. He turned to Serath. I don't belong fully to one side anymore, and maybe that's okay. Her golden eyes studied him closely. Then where do you belong? I belong to both, he said slowly. I belong to anyone willing to fight for what is right, not because of orders or loyalty to a flag, but because life is worth protecting. Serath's expression softened. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. Then you are more than a soldier. You are a bridge, and bridges can carry more than one side. The decision did not please everyone. Some Tharks leaders muttered disapproval. Some humans argued that Daniel should return immediately, that his place was among his own kind. But the child Lyra had already made her choice. She would not leave him, and her voice, filled with innocent clarity, carried more weight than any council's words. Over the next days, Daniel began training with both humans and Tharks. Not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as a teacher and protector. He showed humans new strategies, taught Tharks the ways of cooperation, and helped both sides understand that their skills combined could achieve more than conflict ever could. Lyra followed him everywhere, learning small lessons in courage, kindness, and curiosity. She became the symbol of the alliance, the living proof that a single act of compassion could change an entire world. Word of Daniel's decision eventually reached the councils of both species. Humans grudgingly accepted his choice. Tharks, while initially resistant, began to understand that claiming him would not bind his loyalty genuinely. Sirath stood by him, offering her protection and respect, while letting Daniel remain free to choose his path. One morning, Daniel stood with Sarath and Lyra at the edge of the camp. Soldiers on both sides paused their work to watch him. He raised his hand in greeting, not as a leader, not as a soldier, but as someone who had dared to act differently. A human officer nodded respectfully. A Thark's warrior bowed slightly. And, in that moment, Daniel felt the weight of history shift. He had chosen compassion over orders, trust over fear, and life over endless war. And in return, he had been given the rarest gift, freedom, and the chance to make the world better. Sarath placed a hand on his arm. "You will always be welcome among my people," she said softly. Daniel smiled, looking down at Lyra, who clung to his other hand. "And you will always be part of my family," he said. The three of them stood together as the sun rose fully, casting light over the once ruined city. For the first time in decades, the air felt alive with possibility. Children's laughter echoed through the streets. Soldiers trained side by side, not as enemies, but as partners. The future remained uncertain, yes, but now it was a future they could shape together. Daniel looked out over the horizon, thinking of the countless lives, lost and the many who had fought without pause. He thought of the first time he had seen Lyra crying in the rubble, the moment he had thrown himself in front of danger. That act, small and human, had sparked hope. And now that hope had grown. Humans and Tharks would rebuild. They would learn from each other. They would carry scars, yes, but they would also carry understanding, and the knowledge that compassion could be stronger than any weapon. Daniel bent down to Lyra, lifting her onto his shoulders. She laughed, pointing at soldiers on both sides training together. "Hail strong," she said proudly. Daniel laughed with her. "Stronger than I ever thought." Sarath watched silently, a rare smile touching her lips. "Perhaps," she said, quietly, "strength is not in arms alone. Perhaps it is in the heart." And so the human soldier who had shielded the enemy's child with his own body became more than a man. He became a symbol, a teacher, and a bridge between two worlds. A bridge built not of steel or fire, but of courage, compassion, and the belief that even in the darkest times, humanity's light could shine. The war was over, but a new era had begun, and Daniel, free, unclaimed, and yet belonging everywhere, stood at the center of it, ready to protect, teach, and inspire.